48 hours, get out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. William Calderon stood in the doorway of the house she helped build, flanked by two security guards and a lawyer with a briefcase that looked more expensive than her entire wardrobe. He looked at Monique Richards like she was a problem he'd finally solved. No apology, no explanation, just eviction papers and cold efficiency. She left with her life crammed into garbage bags while neighbors watched from behind curtains. But the story didn't end on that driveway. It ended when she walked into Calderon National Bank and slid an old, faded card across the counter. One her late grandmother had hidden inside a Bible with a single instruction. If the world ever shuts its doors on you, take this and don't explain yourself. The teller's screen flashed red. Alarms went silent. Staff froze. And then the branch manager stepped forward, pale and trembling, and said the words that would change everything. "Ma'am, the CEO has requested to see you immediately." Hello, friends. Welcome back. Before we begin, I need to ask you something. If this story already has you hooked, if you want to see what happens when the powerless become untouchable, please hit that subscribe button right now. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from. Because this isn't just entertainment. This is a reminder that the people who underestimate you don't get to write your ending. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Chapter 1, Monique didn't see the first trash bag coming. One moment she was standing in the hallway of her home, begging William to just talk to her. The next, she heard the rough scrape of plastic against hardwood and watched her clothes fly past her shoulder and land on the front lawn with a dull thud. The house still smelled like the coffee she'd brewed that morning, but the man in front of her looked like a stranger. 48 hours, William said, voice flat and businesslike. That's what the order says. I'm being generous by letting you take your things now. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't even look angry. That's what made it worse. Monique's throat tightened. William, what is this? We can talk about whatever's wrong. Just, please, tell me what I did. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to one of the guards, a man in a black uniform with a bored expression, and gestured toward the bedroom. Second floor, everything in the closet on the left. Box it up. The guard nodded and walked past Monique like she wasn't even there. Her chest felt like it was caving in. William, don't. His tone was sharp now, cutting. This isn't a negotiation, Monique. You're wasting time. She flinched. From the kitchen doorway, a woman appeared. Sleek ponytail, designer blouse, expensive heels that clicked against the tile with deliberate confidence. Vanessa Laurent, William's business partner. Or at least, that's what Monique had been told. Vanessa leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a look of thinly veiled amusement. You should have seen this coming, Monique, Vanessa said softly, almost sweetly. Some people just don't fit where they don't belong. Monique's breath caught. She turned to Vanessa, disbelief burning in her chest. Vanessa, please. Can you just talk to him? You've known us for years. This doesn't make sense. Vanessa tilted her head, lips curving into a slow, satisfied smile. The kind of smile that said, this wasn't sudden at all. This was planned. Oh, sweetie, Vanessa purred. I think it makes perfect sense. Monique looked back at William, desperately searching his face for something, anything that resembled the man she'd married. But he was already checking his watch. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, he said coldly. Just go. Don't make this dramatic. Dramatic, Monique almost laughed. The sound broke halfway out. You're throwing your wife out of her own home, and you're telling me not to be dramatic? William's jaw tightened. Vanessa pushed off the counter and walked toward Monique with slow, deliberate steps. She stopped just inches away, close enough that Monique could smell her perfume. Expensive, sharp, suffocating. Not her home, Vanessa said quietly. Your name isn't on the deed anymore. The world tilted. Monique stared at her, unable to breathe. What? Vanessa's smile widened. I handled the paperwork myself, about a month ago. You signed something without reading it, remember? You trusted him. Monique's mind raced back, a stack of papers. Late at night, William sliding them across the kitchen table, kissing her forehead, telling her they were routine refinancing forms. Just sign here, babe. I'll handle the rest. She'd trusted him. God, she'd trusted him. Her hands started shaking. You You planned this, Monique whispered, her voice cracking. You both planned this. William gave her a long, empty stare. I planned a future, he said simply. You're just not part of it anymore. Her knees almost gave out, but she refused to collapse in front of them. She grabbed the handle of the nearest trash bag, gripping it so hard her knuckles turned white. Fine, she said, voice trembling, but steady. But I need access to our savings. Just enough to... William's expression flickered with something almost amused. What savings? Monique froze. He shrugged, casual as if discussing the weather. Everything's tied up in business expenses right now. I told you that. You said it was temporary. It was, he said smoothly. Until today. The door slammed shut before she could say another word. Vanessa's final smirk was the last thing she saw before the lock clicked. Monique stood on the lawn, surrounded by trash bags, staring at the house she'd called home for 6 years. Waiting for the door to open again. Waiting for William to realize what he'd done. But nothing moved. Not a curtain, not a shadow, nothing. A car passed slowly. The driver glanced at her, then quickly looked away. She knew what she looked like. Someone whose life had been emptied out in broad daylight. She forced herself to move. One step, then another. By the time she reached the bus stop, the tears came. Hot, furious, humiliating. She hated crying in public. But the betrayal was too sharp, too total to swallow down. The bus groaned to a stop. She dragged her bags on board and collapsed into the piéceum, pressing her trembling hands together. She wished she could call her grandmother. Grace always knew what to do, but Grace was gone, and Monique had never felt more alone. She ended up at the cheapest motel she could find, the kind where the front desk clerk didn't ask questions because he didn't care. The room smelled like bleach and stale carpet. Her bag sat in the corner, looking just as lost as she felt. Monique dropped onto the bed, chest tight, head spinning. Every breath brought another memory she didn't want. William on their wedding day promising he'd protect her. William convincing her to quit her job so he could take care of her. William assuring her his family would grow to love her. She'd believed him. She'd believed all of them. By morning, the ache in her chest was dull but constant, like a bruise being pressed again and again. She needed a plan. No home, no money, no husband, no family. Just nothing. She opened her last remaining bag, the one her grandmother had given her years ago. Inside were a few clothes, an old photo of her and Grace at a church picnic, and a sealed envelope she didn't remember packing. She stared at it, confused. Her name was written in Grace's strong, looping handwriting. Underneath, in smaller letters, for when the world forgets your value. Monique's throat tightened. She tore the envelope open slowly, almost afraid of what she'd find. Inside was a card. Not a debit card, not a credit card, something older, heavier, faded gold edges. On the back, in neat blue ink, Grace had written, "Use only when you're ready to start again. And don't explain yourself." Monique turned the card over in her hands, studying it. It didn't make sense. Grace had never had money. She'd lived in a modest house in Jamaica, clipped coupons, stretched every dollar. The idea that there was anything attached to this card felt impossible. Still, the thought of even a few dollars was enough to make hope flicker in her chest. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. She slipped the card into her pocket, grabbed her bag, and headed for the nearest branch of Calderon National Bank, the one William's family had built their empire on. The irony wasn't lost on her. The bank gleamed with glass doors and polished marble floors. Inside, it smelled like expensive coffee and leather furniture. Everyone moved with quiet, professional speed. Monique stepped up to the teller, a young woman with neat hair and nervous hands. She smiled politely. "Good morning, how can I help you today?" Monique placed the card on the counter. "I'd like to check the balance on this." The teller picked it up, studied it with mild confusion, then shrugged and slid it through the machine. The moment she did, the lights above them flickered. The teller frowned. The screen in front of her flashed bright red, then black, then red again. The computer beeped once, sharp, metallic, and then every monitor within sight went silent. The room filled with a low hum. Staff looked up from their desks. A man in a suit 3 stations down froze mid-sentence. "What in the world?" the teller whispered. She tried the card again. The machine shut itself off. A woman near the back whispered urgently into a phone. "It's her name, Grace Richards. After all these years, should we call?" Monique's pulse spiked. More people turned. Murmurs stirred the air. The teller's face had gone pale. She looked at Monique like she was something unexpected, something dangerous. "Ma'am, just a moment." She hurried to the back room. Monique stood there, confused, embarrassed, and now anxious enough that her fingers were shaking. She wasn't sure if she should run or wait. Before she could move, a man in a navy suit stepped out from the executive hallway. His tie was slightly crooked, his breath uneven. He stared at Monique like he'd seen a ghost. "Miss Richards?" Monique blinked. "I'm Monique. Grace was my grandmother." He swallowed so hard she saw his throat work. "Please, wait right here." The staff were whispering again, louder this time. "Grace Richards' heir. Is that really her? Should we alert?" The man in the navy suit stepped closer, his voice tight with something that sounded almost like fear. "Ma'am, the CEO has requested to see you. Immediately." Monique stared at him. "The CEO? Why?" "I just wanted to check the balance." "Please," he said softly, "don't be afraid. But we need to go upstairs." Upstairs, the executive floor, a place she'd never even seen from the inside. She followed him past rows of wide eyes. Employees paused their calls. A woman near the break room clasped her hand over her mouth as Monique walked by. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her teeth. When they reached the private elevator, the man swiped a card and held the door for her. The elevator smelled like new leather and cold air. Monique stepped inside, clutching her grandmother's card, trying not to panic. The man pressed the top button, then leaned forward slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been waiting 20 years for the rightful heir to walk through those doors." The doors slid shut. Monique gripped the elevator rail so tightly her fingers ached. Rightful heir. The words circled her mind, impossible and heavy. Her grandmother, Grace, who'd lived simply and never spoke of wealth or power. How could any of this make sense? The elevator climbed slowly. Each floor passed with a soft chime that made Monique's pulse spike. She wasn't dressed for this. She wasn't ready for whatever waited beyond those polished doors. But ready or not, her life was about to change forever. Chapter 2. The elevator climbed slowly, each floor passing with a soft chime that made Monique's pulse spike higher. She gripped the handrail tighter, trying to steady her breathing, but her chest couldn't find a rhythm. Rightful heir. The words the manager had whispered kept circling her mind, impossible and heavy. Her grandmother, Grace Richards, who'd lived in a small house in Kingston with a rusted gates and a garden she'd tended with her bare hands. Who'd clipwood coupons and stretched every dollar. Who'd sent Monique to college on teachers' pension scraps and prayers. How could any of this make sense? The elevator finally stopped with a gentle ping. Executive level. The doors slid open onto a quiet hallway lined with frosted glass and abstract art that probably cost more than Monique's entire wardrobe. The manager stepped out first and motioned for her to follow. "Right this way, Miss Richards." Monique forced her legs to move. Her sneakers squeaked against the glossy floor, the sound far too loud in the hushed space. She felt eyes on her the whole way, though no one else appeared in the hall. The air had a strange weight to it, like everyone in the building was holding their breath at once. They stopped outside a double door of dark wood. The brass plate read, "Jonathan Pierce, Chief Executive Officer." The manager knocked once. "Sir, she's here." A voice came from inside, calm, controlled. "Send her in." The manager opened the door and stepped aside. Monique hesitated for a second, fear rising like a tide inside her. But turning back wasn't an option. She stepped into the office. The room was massive. Tall windows lined one wall, showing the entire city skyline. The desk was sleek black glass, and behind it stood Jonathan Pierce. Mid-50s, silver hair, posture sharp as a blade. He took one look at Monique and stared as if he already knew her. "Miss Richards," he said, his tone strange. Not warm, not cold. Something like caution mixed with respect. "Thank you for coming." Monique felt her voice waver. I didn't really choose to come. Your staff, something happened with the card. Yes, Jonathan gestured for her to sit, though he did not sit himself. We're aware. Monique sat anyway because her knees might give out otherwise. She placed the old bank card on her lap, the plastic warm from her hands. Jonathan kept watching her like he was studying rare glass. How long have you had that card? I don't know, Monique said honestly. My grandmother left it in an envelope. I never opened it until this morning. He inhaled slowly, almost like he was steadying himself. Miss Richards, your grandmother was not an ordinary customer. Monique's stomach tightened. I know she had an account here, but she didn't have money. We struggled growing up. Jonathan's eyes flickered. I'm afraid she kept many things from you. Monique didn't know what to say to that. Grace didn't keep secrets, not big ones. She was honest to a fault. But Jonathan Pierce looked like a man who wasn't speculating. He looked like someone delivering news he'd rehearsed for years. He walked around the desk and stood closer, giving her the full weight of his attention. Your grandmother was one of Calderon National Bank's founding investors, a silent partner. Her share was substantial. Monique almost laughed. It burst out as a tiny shock sound. What? No, that can't be right. My grandmother lived in a rented house with bad pipes. She never even bought a new car. Jonathan nodded once. I can imagine she preferred privacy, but the facts are the facts. She owned 20% of this institution. Monique's throat went dry. 20%? That's impossible. Why would she never tell me? That, he said quietly, is the question the board asked for 2 decades. He took the card from her hands and held it like something fragile. This card is tied to a secured vault account. It hasn't been accessed since Grace Richards stopped responding to board communications. Monique shook her head. She didn't stop responding. She got sick. She wasn't checking her mail. She didn't know anything about board meetings. Jonathan's expression shifted just slightly, like her answer didn't fit what he'd been told. I see. We believe she withdrew by choice. No, Monique whispered. She never said anything about the bank. Not once. If she had, I don't know, I would have asked questions. I believe you, Jonathan said, but his eyes held a shadow of something heavier, something that made goosebumps rise on Monique's arms. Still, there's a protocol we must follow. He paused. Monique waited, pulse hammering. Your grandmother's shares were tied to a succession clause, meaning when she passed, the rights transferred. Another pause. To her heir, he finished. To you. Monique stared at him, unable to breathe. That's not possible. I don't have money. I don't have anything. I can't even buy lunch. Jonathan gave a small, tense smile. That's about to change. He returned to his desk and opened a leather folder, pulling out a document with Grace's signature at the bottom. But you must understand, Miss Richards, your inheritance is not just financial. It comes with questions. Questions about where your grandmother's money came from, how it was hidden, and why. Monique's hands were trembling now. I don't understand any of this. You will, Jonathan said softly. In time. He closed the folder and Ed looked at her with something close to sympathy. For now, I need you to stay close. Don't leave the city. Don't talk to anyone about this, especially not your ex-husband. Monique's blood ran cold. William? What does he have to do with this? Jonathan's jaw tightened. More than you know. Monique left the bank in a daze. The manager escorted her back down to the main floor, but this time staff didn't stare. They bowed their heads as she passed. She didn't understand it. She didn't understand any of it. When she finally stepped outside into the late afternoon sunlight, she felt like she'd been underwater for hours and was only now gasping for air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Temporary accommodations have been arranged. A car will pick you up in 10 minutes. Do not return to the motel. Jay. Monique stared at the screen, heart racing. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to throw the phone away and disappear. But she had nowhere to go. No money, no home, no plan. So when the black sedan pulled up 10 minutes later, she got in. The driver didn't speak. He took her to a building she'd only ever seen from a distance. The Meridian, one of the most exclusive residences in the city. She was escorted to a penthouse suite on the 23rd floor. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Monique stood in the center of the room, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She dropped her bag on the floor and sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. For the first time since the eviction, she let herself feel it. The betrayal, the terror, the confusion, and beneath it all, something else. Something her grandmother had left behind. Not just money, not just a card, but a plan. Monique pulled out her phone and stared at the text again. Then she whispered into the empty room, "What were you protecting me from, Grandma?" The silence didn't answer, but somewhere deep in Monique felt the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in days. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. Chapter 3. Monique woke the next morning in a bed that didn't feel real. The sheets were too soft, the pillows too perfectly placed. The entire suite smelled faintly of lavender and something expensive she couldn't name. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The eviction, the card, the CEO, 20%. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from the tension she'd been carrying for days. On the nightstand, her phone buzzed. Another text from JP. "A representative will arrive at 10 a.m. to discuss next steps. Breakfast has been delivered to your door. Please eat." Monique glanced at the clock. 9:47 a.m. She scrambled out of bed and opened the front door. Sure enough, a covered tray sat on a silver cart. She wheeled it inside and lifted the lid. Fresh fruit, pastries, coffee that smelled like it cost more than her last meal. Her stomach twisted with hunger and guilt. She ate quickly, mechanically, trying not to think about how surreal this all was. By the time the knock came at 10 o'clock sharp, she changed into the only clean clothes she had left, a simple blouse and jeans that felt painfully out of place. She opened the door. A woman in a charcoal suit stood in the hallway holding a leather briefcase. Early 40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense energy. "Miss Richards, I'm Elena Moss, Senior Legal Counsel for Calderon National Bank." Monique stepped aside to let her in. Elena walked straight to the dining table and set down her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "We don't have much time, so I'll be direct. The card you used yesterday triggered a founder-level verification protocol. Do you understand what that means?" Monique shook her head. "Not really." Elena opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Your grandmother, Grace Richards, was listed as a founding partner when this bank was established in 1982. She invested offshore capital during a period of financial restructuring in the Caribbean. Her stake was substantial, 20%, as Mr. Pierce told you." Monique sank into a chair. "But why would she hide it? Why wouldn't she tell me?" Elena's expression softened, just slightly. "That's what we're trying to understand. What we do know is that approximately 15 years ago, your grandmother stopped attending board meetings. Her dividends were rerouted to a trust account, and her name was quietly removed from public records." "Removed?" Monique's pulse spiked. "By who?" Elena hesitated. "That's under investigation." Monique's mind raced. "And the card?" "The card," Elena said carefully, "was issued to only 3 founding partners. It grants access to a succession vault, a fail-safe designed to protect generational wealth in case of complications." "Complications?" "Theft, fraud, coercion." Elena met her eyes. "Your grandmother built that fail-safe for a reason, Miss Richards. She anticipated that someone might try to take what was hers." Monique felt her chest tighten. "And now I'm the heir." "Yes. Which means," Elena's jaw tightened, "which means if anyone has been misusing those funds, your presence here is a threat to them." The room went cold. Monique's voice dropped to a whisper. "William." Elena didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. "Mr. Pierce has authorized a quiet internal audit. We're reviewing all accounts tied to your grandmother's original stake. If discrepancies are found, we'll take action." Monique's hands were shaking again. "What kind of action?" "Freezing assets, investigating transfers, potentially pressing charges." Monique stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, the city stretched out in neat grids. People going about their lives, unaware that hers had just been turned inside out. "This is insane," she whispered. "I know," Elena said quietly. "But you're not alone. The bank will protect you. Legally, financially, and if necessary, physically." Monique turned sharply. "Physically?" Elena's expression was grim. "Your ex-husband is a powerful man, Miss Richards. If he realizes you're the reason his accounts are being scrutinized, he will retaliate." Monique's stomach dropped. "You think he'll come after me?" "I think," Elena said carefully, "you should be very careful. Don't go anywhere alone. Don't contact him. And don't trust anyone who knew about your marriage." Monique sank back into the chair, her mind spinning. "What do I do now?" Elena closed the briefcase and stood. "You wait. Let us do our job, and when the time comes..." She paused at the door, turning back with something close to respect in her eyes. "You step into the role your grandmother built for you." The door closed softly behind her. Monique sat in the silence, staring at the card still sitting on the table. Her grandmother's card, her grandmother's plan. And somewhere out there, William had no idea what was coming. Chapter 4. 3 days passed in a blur. Monique stayed in the penthouse, watched over by security she never saw but always felt. Elena checked in daily with updates that raised more questions than answers. Discrepancies found in offshore transfers. Accounts linked to unverified shell companies. Timeline matches your grandmother's departure from the board. Monique tried to piece it together, but the picture kept shifting. On the fourth morning, her phone rang. Jonathan Pierce. "Miss Richards, I need you to come to the bank. There's something you need to see." An hour later, Monique sat across from Jonathan in a private conference room deep within the executive wing. The walls were soundproof glass. No windows, no interruptions. On the table between them sat a single file. Confidential. Grace Richards, 1982-2009. Jonathan slid it toward her. "Before you open this, I need you to understand something. What you're about to learn will change how you see your grandmother. It may even change how you see yourself." Monique's throat tightened. "Just tell me." Jonathan nodded slowly, but "Your grandmother wasn't just an investor, Miss Richards. She was a founder. She provided the initial offshore capital that allowed this bank to survive a financial crisis in the early 80s. Without her, Calderon National wouldn't exist." Monique stared at him. "That's impossible. She was a school teacher." "She was," Jonathan agreed. "But before that, she worked in international finance. Kingston, London, New York. She built wealth quietly, strategically, and when the Calderon family needed a lifeline, she gave it to them." Monique's pulse pounded in her ears. "Then why did she leave?" Jonathan's expression darkened. "She didn't leave, she was pushed out." He opened the file and pulled out a stack of documents. Board meeting minutes, financial statements, letters written in her grandmother's handwriting. In 2009, your grandmother raised concerns about irregular transfers within the bank. Funds moving through accounts she didn't authorize. When she pressed for an audit, the board voted to remove her. Monique's breath caught. They forced her out? Quietly, legally. They restructured her shares into a trust, rerouted her dividends, and buried her name in legal paperwork so dense no one would question it. Monique felt tears sting her eyes. And she just let them? Jonathan's voice softened. She didn't have a choice. She was one woman against an entire institution. But she didn't surrender, Miss Richards. She built a failsafe. He tapped the card still sitting in front of Monique. That card, the succession clause, the vault account. She knew one day someone would come looking, and she made sure when they did, the truth would come out. Monique's hands trembled as she picked up one of the letters. It was dated March 2009. To the Board of Directors, I am writing to formally request an independent audit of all offshore accounts tied to the original founding investment. I have reason to believe funds are being misappropriated without proper authorization. If this matter is not addressed, I will have no choice but to pursue legal action. Respectfully, Grace E. Richards. Monique's vision blurred. She fought them. She did, Jonathan said, and they silenced her, but they couldn't erase her completely. Because the moment you used that card, the entire system recognized you. Not as a customer, as an owner. Monique looked up, tears streaming down her face. Why didn't she tell me? Jonathan's expression was grave. Because she was protecting you. If they knew you existed, if they knew you were her heir, they would have come for you too. Monique's chest heaved with grief and rage. Who? Who did this to her? Jonathan hesitated. Then he pulled out one final document, a transfer authorization form, dated 2008, signed by William Calderon. Monique's world stopped. No. Jonathan's voice was steady, but his eyes held sympathy. Your ex-husband's family has been managing the trust your grandmother was forced into. For 15 years, they've been diverting funds from her original stake into private accounts. Accounts tied directly to William's real estate empire. Monique couldn't breathe. He knew. He knew who I was. Jonathan nodded slowly. We believe so. The timeline of your marriage coincides with an uptick in transfers. It's possible you were targeted, Miss Richards, not for love, but for control. Monique stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. Her hands shook, her vision swam. He married me to steal from my grandmother? We're still investigating, Jonathan said carefully. But the evidence suggests your marriage gave him proximity, access, legitimacy. Monique's voice cracked. And when he was done with me, he threw me out like garbage. Jonathan stood, his tone firm, but not unkind. Which is why we're going to stop him. Monique looked at him, her grief hardening into something sharper. How? Jonathan's expression turned cold. I'm authorizing a temporary freeze on all accounts linked to the misappropriated funds. Effective immediately. Monique's pulse spiked. You're freezing William's accounts? Every single one. For the first time in days, Monique felt something other than fear. She felt power. Do it. Jonathan picked up his phone and made the call. Within minutes, it was done. And somewhere across the city, William Calderon's world began to collapse. Chapter 5. The freeze hit at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. William Calderon was in the middle of closing a deal when his account was declined. Not flagged, not delayed, declined. He tried another account. Same result. Then another. And another. By 3:15, his assistant was fielding panicked calls from his accountant, his business manager, and 3 different attorneys. By 4 o'clock, William was on the phone with Calderon National Bank, demanding answers. I'm sorry, Mr. Calderon, the representative said, voice calm and maddeningly professional. Your accounts are under internal review. All transactions have been temporarily suspended. Suspended? William's voice went sharp. On whose authority? Executive order, sir. I'm not authorized to provide further details. I want to speak to Jonathan Pierce, now. Mr. Pierce is unavailable. William slammed the phone down so hard it cracked the screen. Across the room, Vanessa looked up from her laptop, concern flickering across her face. What's wrong? William didn't answer. He was already pulling up his accounts online, scrolling through page after page of transaction block notifications. His pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Meanwhile, in the penthouse suite, Monique sat across from Elena, reviewing the evidence the bank had compiled. It was worse than she'd imagined. Your marriage certificate was filed 3 weeks after your grandmother stopped responding to board communications, Elena said, pointing to a timeline displayed on her tablet. Within 6 months, William transferred the deed of your home into his name alone. Monique's stomach twisted. I signed those papers. He told me it was for tax purposes. It wasn't, Elena said flatly. It was to establish legal control. If you'd ever tried to claim your inheritance, he could argue you'd willingly relinquish financial independence. Monique felt sick. He planned this from the beginning. We believe so, and it goes deeper. Elena pulled up another document, a corporate filing from 2011. William's first major real estate acquisition was funded by a loan from an offshore account. That account was originally tied to your grandmother's trust. Monique's hands clenched into fists. He stole from her to build his empire. And when your grandmother passed, he likely assumed the trail was buried. But then you walked into the bank with that card. Monique's voice shook and triggered a system he didn't know existed. Elena nodded. Exactly. Monique stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city. Somewhere out there, William was realizing his accounts were frozen. He was scrambling, panicking. Good. What happens now? Monique asked quietly. Now, Elena said, we wait for him to make a mistake. William made his mistake at 7:32 p.m. He showed up at the house. Not the penthouse where Monique was staying. He didn't know about that yet. He went to the old house, the one he'd evicted her from. Neighbors later reported hearing shouting, something about that bitch, and ruining everything. Vanessa tried to calm him down, but William was beyond reason. He threw furniture, smashed a glass table, screamed into his phone at lawyers who couldn't give him answers. One neighbor, Mrs. Oliver, recorded a portion of the outburst on her phone. She sent it to the police, and the police sent it to Jonathan Pierce. The next morning, Monique watched the video in the conference room. William's face was twisted with rage, his voice raw and venomous. She's nobody, you hear me? Nobody. I gave her everything, and this is how she repays me? Monique's hands trembled as she watched. Elena paused the video. He's spiraling. That's good for us. The more erratic he becomes, the easier it is to prove intent. Monique's voice was barely a whisper. I lived with that man for 6 years. I shared a bed with him. I trusted him. I know, Elena said gently, and I'm sorry. Monique wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Don't be sorry, just make sure he pays. Elena nodded. We will. By the end of the week, William's empire was in freefall. Partners pulled out of deals. Investors demanded audits. His name, once synonymous with success, was now whispered with suspicion. And Monique? Monique was no longer hiding. She was preparing. Because the next time she saw William Calderon, it wouldn't be as his victim. It would be as the woman who held the key to his downfall. Chapter 6. The first domino fell on a Friday morning. William's largest development project, a luxury condo high-rise downtown, ground to a halt when contractors discovered their payments had bounced. By noon, the construction site was abandoned. By 2:00 p.m., the story had leaked to the press. Calderon development in financial distress, multiple projects halted. William watched the headline scroll across his phone screen, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Vanessa stood in the doorway of his office, arms crossed. They're asking questions, William. Questions we can't answer. Then don't answer, he snapped. Stall them. Tell them it's a banking error. It's not a banking error, Vanessa shot back. Your accounts are frozen. Your credit lines are suspended. Every transaction you've made in the past 5 years is under review. William slammed his fist on the desk. This is her. I know it is. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. Monique? How? She has nothing. You made sure of that. I don't know how, William growled, but this started the day after I evicted her. That's not a coincidence. Vanessa walked closer, her voice dropping. Then we need to find her. Make her understand she's in over her head. William's eyes glinted with something dark. I already know where she is. Monique's phone buzzed at 6:47 p.m. A text from an unknown number. You think you're clever, don't you? Hiding behind lawyers and bank accounts. But you're still the same pathetic woman I threw out, and when I find you, you'll wish you'd stayed gone. Monique's hands shook as she read it. She immediately forwarded the message to Elena. Within 10 minutes, Elena called. Don't respond. Don't engage. I'm sending additional security to your location. He's losing it, Monique whispered. Good, Elena said firmly. Let him. Every threat, every outburst. It's evidence. He's building our case for us. But Monique couldn't shake the fear crawling up her spine. She'd seen William angry before, but she'd never seen him desperate. 2 days later, William showed up at the penthouse. Security stopped him at the lobby, but he made a scene, shouting, demanding to see his wife. The building manager called the police. By the time they arrived, William was standing in the middle of the marble lobby, suit disheveled, eyes wild. She's mine, he screamed. You can't keep her from me. I have rights. One of the officers stepped forward. Sir, you need to calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. William shoved past the officer, making a break for the elevators. Security tackled him before he made it 5 feet. The entire altercation was captured on the building's surveillance cameras. Monique watched the footage later that night, her stomach in knots. William's face was unrecognizable, twisted with rage and something close to madness. He's going to come after me, she whispered. Jonathan Pierce, who'd come to the penthouse personally, nodded grimly. Yes, which is why we're moving up the timeline. Monique looked at him. What timeline? The board meeting. We're calling an emergency session. Tomorrow. Monique's pulse spiked. Tomorrow? We have enough evidence to freeze his assets permanently and begin criminal proceedings. But we need your formal claim on record first. Monique's breath hitched. You want me to go in front of the board? Yes. And say what? Jonathan's expression was calm but resolute. The truth, that you are Grace Richards' rightful heir, and that William Calderon has been stealing from your family for 15 years. Monique's hands trembled. What if they don't believe me? Jonathan's voice was firm. They will. Because I'll be standing beside you. That night, Monique barely slept. She kept replaying the surveillance footage in her mind. William's rage, his desperation, his complete unraveling. And beneath her fear, something else stirred. He had taken everything from her, her home, her dignity, her sense of self. But he hadn't taken this. He hadn't taken her grandmother's legacy. And tomorrow she was going to take it back. Chapter 7. The morning of the board meeting, a package arrived at Monique's door. No return address, just her name written in familiar handwriting. Her grandmother's handwriting. Monique's breath caught. She carried the package inside and set it on the table with trembling hands. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, and a letter. Monique unfolded the letter slowly, her vision already blurring with tears. My dearest Monique, if you're reading this, then you've used the card. And if you've used the card, then the world has tried to shut its doors on you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from that. But know this, everything I did, every secret I kept, every sacrifice I made, was to prepare you for this moment. I know you must have questions. Why did I hide the money? Why did I live so simply? Why didn't I tell you the truth? The answer is simple, my darling. I was waiting for you to be strong enough, waiting for the right time, waiting for the people who stole from me to finally make a mistake. I knew they would. Greed always exposes itself in the end. When I first invested in that bank, I believed in something bigger than money. I believed in building something that could last. But I learned too late that not everyone shares that vision. The Calderons took what was mine. They buried my name, silenced my voice, and thought I would simply disappear. But I didn't disappear. I waited, and I built a failsafe. That card you're holding, it's not just access to money. It's proof, it's leverage. It's the key to everything they tried to take. And now it's yours. You may feel afraid. You may feel small. But hear me, Monique. You are not small. You are my legacy. You are the woman I raised to stand when others fall, to speak when others stay silent. Don't let them make you believe you don't belong. Don't let them convince you you're not worthy. You are a Richards, and Richards women do not beg for what is already theirs. Take what's yours, my darling, and don't apologize for it. With all my love, Grandma Grace. Monique sat in silence for a long time after reading the letter. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of clarity. Her grandmother hadn't abandoned her. She'd prepared her. Every lesson about resilience, every story about standing your ground, every quiet moment of wisdom Grace had shared over the years, they were all leading to this. Monique wiped her eyes and stood. She walked to the mirror and looked at herself, really looked. Not as William's discarded wife, not as the woman who'd been thrown onto the street with trash bags, but as Grace Richards' granddaughter. And that woman didn't beg. Chapter 8. The boardroom was exactly as imposing as Monique had imagined. A long table of polished mahogany, high-backed leather chairs, walls lined with portraits of men who'd built empires and crushed competitors. Monique stepped inside, flanked by Jonathan Pierce and Elena Moss. Every board member turned to look at her. 12 faces, mostly men, all studying her with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and unease. At the far end of the table sat Richard Calderon, William's father, silver-haired, stone-faced, the man who'd built this institution from the ground up, or so the official story went. Jonathan gestured for Monique to sit. She did, keeping her spine straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Jonathan remained standing. Gentlemen, he began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Thank you for convening on short notice. I've called this meeting to address a matter of significant legal and financial importance. He gestured to Monique. This is Monique Richards, granddaughter of Grace Eleanor Richards, one of the original founding investors of this institution. Murmurs rippled through the room. Richard Calderon's expression didn't change, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest of his chair. Jonathan continued. As of this morning, Miss Richards has formally claimed her inheritance under the succession clause outlined in the original partnership agreement signed in 1982. One of the board members, a man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, leaned forward. With all due respect, Mr. Pierce, Grace Richards hasn't been active in this institution for over 15 years. Her shares were dissolved into a trust. Dissolved, Jonathan repeated, his tone sharp. Or stolen. The room went silent. Elena stood and placed a folder in front of each board member. What you're looking at, she said calmly, is a comprehensive audit of all accounts tied to Grace Richards' original investment. What we found is troubling. She let the word hang. Between 2009 and present day, over $40 million were transferred out of the trust and into private accounts controlled by Calderon family members, specifically William Calderon. Gasp echoed through the room. Richard Calderon's face went red. That's absurd. My son has built his business through legitimate theft, Monique said quietly. Every head turned toward her. She stood slowly, meeting Richard Calderon's eyes without flinching. My grandmother trusted this institution. She invested her life savings because she believed in building something honest. And your family repaid her by stealing from her, by erasing her, by silencing her when she tried to fight back. Her voice grew stronger. But she didn't stay silent. She left me a key, and that key just unlocked everything you tried to bury. Richard's jaw tightened. You have no proof. Elena slid another document across the table. Transfer authorizations, signed by William Calderon. Routing funds from Grace Richards' trust into shell companies he controls. It's all here. The room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted over each other. Accusations flew. Legal threats were made. Jonathan raised his hand, and the room fell silent. This institution was built on integrity, he said, his voice like steel. And if we allow this corruption to stand, we are complicit. He turned to Richard Calderon. The board has a choice. We can address this internally, freeze the stolen assets, and restore what was taken. Or we can let this go public and watch this bank's reputation crumble. Richard Calderon stared at Jonathan for a long, tense moment. Then he looked at Monique. What do you want? Monique didn't hesitate. I want what's mine. Every dollar, every share, every piece of my grandmother's legacy that your family tried to steal. Richard's expression darkened. And my son? Monique's voice was ice. Your son will face the consequences of his actions, just like anyone else who commits fraud. The room was silent. Finally, Jonathan spoke. All in favor of freezing William Calderon's accounts permanently and initiating a full criminal investigation? One by one, hands rose. Even Richard Calderon, his face twisted with barely contained rage, raised his hand. The vote was unanimous. Monique left the boardroom with her head high. Behind her, the institution her grandmother had helped build was finally reckoning with its sins. In William Calderon's empire, it was over. Chapter 9. 3 months later, Monique stood on the balcony of her new home, a quiet brownstone in a neighborhood that felt like hers. Not a penthouse, not a palace, just a place where she could breathe. Below, the city hummed with life. People rushed to work, to meetings, to lives that didn't revolve around betrayal or revenge. Monique took a sip of coffee and let the morning sun warm her face. Her phone buzzed. A news alert. William Calderon sentenced to 8 years for fraud and embezzlement. She read the headline once, then set the phone down. She felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no grief, just closure. The trial had been swift. With the evidence Elena and Jonathan had compiled, William's defense crumbled within weeks. His lawyers tried to argue he'd been misled, that he hadn't known the funds were stolen. But the paper trail was too clear. Transfer after transfer, shell company after shell company, all leading back to him. Vanessa had testified against him, cutting a deal to avoid prison herself. Richard Calderon had resigned from the board in disgrace. And Monique? Monique had reclaimed her grandmother's shares. She was now a voting member of Calderon National Bank's board. She didn't attend every meeting. She didn't need to. But when she did, people listened. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Elena. Elena holding a folder. "Morning," Elena said with a small smile. "Thought you'd want to see this." Monique took the folder and opened it. Inside was a deed. The house. The one William had evicted her from. It was hers again. Monique looked up, eyes wide. "How?" "Court order," Elena said simply. The deed transfer was fraudulent. The judge reversed it. Monique stared at the document, emotions swirling. "I don't know if I want it," she admitted quietly. Elena nodded. "Then sell it. Donate it. Turn it into something new. It's yours to do with as you please." Monique smiled. "I think I'll sell it and use the money to fund scholarships for women who need a second chance." Elena's smile widened. "Your grandmother would love that." That evening, Monique sat at her kitchen table, writing a letter she'd never send. "Dear Grandma, I used the card just like you knew I would. And you were right about everything. The world did try to shut its doors on me, but you left me a key. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why you kept so much hidden, but I'm starting to see that it wasn't about shame. It was about timing. You waited, you prepared, you built something that would outlast you. And now it's mine. I'm not the woman William tried to erase. I'm not the woman he threw away. I'm a Richards. And Richards women don't beg for what's already theirs. Thank you, Grandma, for everything. Love, Monique." She folded the letter and placed it inside her grandmother's Bible, the same one where the card had been hidden. Then she closed the book and set it on the shelf. Monique walked back to the balcony and looked out at the city once more. Somewhere out there, William was beginning his sentence. Somewhere out there, people who'd underestimated her were realizing their mistake. But Monique wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the future, about the scholarships she'd create, about the women she'd help, about the legacy she'd build, not in her grandmother's shadow, but standing beside it. The eviction had failed, the silence had broken, and the woman they tried to erase, she had become untouchable. Thank you for being here until the very end. Monique's story is over, but yours is just beginning. If this reminded you that being underestimated doesn't mean being powerless, hit that subscribe button. Comment where you're watching from, and click the next video on your screen. Because there are more stories like this, more voices that refuse to be silenced. Let's keep going.